Seventh graders, this is to help you with question 7 on CR 26. Haley used the school copier to make flyers for the school dance. She found that the machine makes copies at a constant rate. Constant rate just means if you make 40 copies in the first minute, then you'll also make 40 more in the second minute, 40 more in the third minute. That's a constant rate. The information is displayed in the table below. So we have T for number of minutes. After 1 minute, you've made 40 copies. 2 minutes, you've made 80 copies. 3 minutes, you've made 120. 4 minutes, you've made 160. And your number of copies, they say, let that be C. Write an equation that represents the total number of copies as a direct variation with the number of minutes copied. Okay. Equation must have an equal sign. Lots of ways to go about this. First, you could just look at the table and say, how do I get from 1 to 40? Well, 1 times 40 is 40. How do I get from 2 to 80? 2 times 40 is 80. How do I get from 3 to 120? 3 times 40 is 120. How do I get from 4 to 160? 4 times 40 is 160. So if we have T, how do I get to C? I take T and I multiply by 40, and that gets me to my number of copies, C. So here, you could do T times 40 equals C, your number of copies. Just take your number of minutes, you multiply the number of minutes by 40, you'll get your number of copies. So this would be one acceptable equation. Normally, we put the constant first, so 40 times T would be another acceptable equation. That will give you your number of copies. You also don't need this dot here, so you could say 40T equals C. So that's variation 1. Here's something else you could do. You could also take number of minutes to number of copies equals number of minutes to number of copies. So you could say, I know in 1 minute there's 40 copies that are made. That's my fact. In 1 minute there's 40 copies. So then the question is, in T minutes, there'll be C copies. So 1 over 40 equals T over C is another acceptable equation. So you can write any of these equations. There's actually more acceptable equations, but for time constraints, I'm not going to continue on. But all you have to do is you have to have an equation, so if you plug in a number of minutes, you'll be able to find out the number of copies, and it has to actually work based on the numbers you're given. I hope that helps.